All
Hey,
right.
so welcome everyone to another episode of the Urban Files. This is a show where Max and myself, Chuck, we discuss urban issues. We discuss many things related to cities, public transit. We discuss urban development. We discuss what are the coolest neighborhoods and places to eat. So that's kind of some of the things that we discuss when we're on this show each week. There'll be a new episode coming out each
Hey,
week.
so welcome
And
everyone.
so basically, this past week, Max and I were lucky enough to attend the APTA Expo, which is the world's largest trade show related to public transit and the vehicles at it and various things. And, we talked to you guys about the general experience of being there and stuff, but we kind of wanted to share a few deeper insights. And so I think one of the experiences that stood out to me actually came almost by happenstance. We were stopping and, they had great free refreshments. They had coffee, they had, some kind of like cupcake pastry things and all that. And we are just kind of sitting there munching on that and talking about, the irony of Uber sponsoring this conference because, Uber in part has been a direct reason or correlation to a decline in public transit usage in the last few years. And right as I am finishing saying this, the senior account executive for Uber Transit happens to come up on us, and he happened to, be very nice, and he engaged with us for another 15 or 20 minutes after that. There was another guy after that who didn't necessarily believe that people would go to this thing on purpose if they weren't there for work, and he seemed to believe your consultants, which I was kind of willing to go with, but that is besides the point. The point is, Max, what were some of the things that we found that were interesting from this conversation here?
uh, I I guess I wasn't too surprised by the conversation we had. It more or less was like an Uber mouthpiece, which he is, a representative of the company, spouting off the more or less the public talking points for why Uber uh, Uber can serve an important role in helping cities and helping uh, government transit agencies um, by complementing the things that they don't do well. And I've been aware of what Uber's trying to do, and it's just sort of more of like sort of the skeptic in me wondering whether they really um, can pull it off the way that they say, and whether that's what they would truly want to do also, because it seems like it's more of a sort of a PR stunt to get people to like them rather than truly the sort of end goal. And I guess I don't want to be too abstract. What I'm trying to say is that we all know Uber as a car sharing company, a very unprofitable one, and a food delivery company, and one that's trying to find its way into profitability wherever that market will take, wherever that takes them. And I don't imagine that the stuff that he was telling us is anywhere close to what their focus would be in trying to reach profitability. So, it. So from that standpoint, I don't know, but what they did tell us, what he did tell us, because I'm going on this long tangent here, just to get to it. What he did tell us was one of his focuses is helping transit agencies with the sort of ADA, sort of on demand transportation that they provide to people who, like, wheelchair bound and need to get to the doctor, things like that. The not the mass part of mass transit, the sort of specialized services, and they can do it for cheaper than the government agencies can do it, because this is more or less sort of Uber's bread and butter, is sending out drivers using their technology to connect available drivers to favorable routes, efficient routes. Whereas for a public transit agency, they do a lot of mass transit, moving lots of people around. But then this aspect of mass transit is the most costly portion per passenger mile and diverts a lot of resources. And if Uber can do it more efficiently, they can save transit agencies money. That's more or less what he talked to us about. I mean, he talked about it in many different sort of circumstances and test cases, but yeah, that was more or less what it was, right? And I don't think that for a $100 billion company or whatever Uber is, this is going to be like their end game, their long game. This is not. This is an important thing. This is helpful to cities, but certainly, if you look at the entire picture in totality, it's very likely that over many years, Uber is going to do more damage in other areas than they are going to do helping in this area.
Right. And that's it, it's very beneficial sometimes to look altruistic when you have when it's good for optics, right? And as you said, I think Uber already has killed probably many cab companies. I don't really have research in front of me on that, but I can just imagine the damage they have done to that industry and that protected. I don't know in certain areas, like I don't know with London's cab company, maybe having more protection and kind of more the expertise you need in a city like that to be a cab driver if they maybe haven't made as much headway there. But without doubt, it's definitely been, I mean, they've come in like a tidal wave in terms of the various things that they've done to disrupt, the taxi industry, especially, and in some ways public transit, because I've talked about the rides have fallen some. Mm-hmm. I do think in the near term, he does bring up a point, because I think one of the other things that he mentioned was like in Dallas, actually, I think that they have an after midnight program if you're a regular transit user, which, I mean, we didn't go into exactly how that's verified, but basically you can get an Uber from, whatever public transit stop to your ultimate location after midnight for, a subsidized rate that would ultimately, Uber would receive their full balance, but they'd receive it from the city as opposed to from there. So Uber is getting benefit in all this too. So that point certainly goes without saying.
Yeah, that was actually a really interesting program that he mentioned. Again, when we take these in isolation, they can be win-win for Uber, for the public, for the riders. It can be a win-win-win situation, and I'm not trying to take away from that. I'm just, again, looking big picture and saying this is the good thing that Uber does, but let's not forget everything else, all the other effects of what Uber does. So and the Dallas program that you mentioned, it was like, I guess the overhead for certain bus routes is X, and it's much higher than what it would be if DART, assuming this is a DART funded program, if DART pays for an Uber for all of their riders between certain hours, it would actually be cheaper than continuing to run the buses on whatever infrequent headways they were planning to run. So it's interesting if that can be a win-win for everyone. It's great. I do, you do have to wonder whether such a system would be abused by people who wouldn't normally take transit and are just trying to get a subsidized ride share to wherever they're going. But yeah, I mean, in concept, it's a good idea.
Yeah, well, that I guess that brings into question that thing of where you use your services, because I think the other thing you have to consider is how often is this person going to do that? Because obviously, economics, and really the first rule of economics, as I've learned, is people respond to incentives. And so the incentive potentially if you find it more comfortable to have a direct ride or whatever by Uber, is to maybe conveniently miss the 10 o'clock bus. And then if I'm just thinking out loud here, then why catch the 10 o'clock bus when you can get an Uber if you so desire, right? So that's another thing that you would have to look at with that. I have, in terms of international transit, there's definitely been cases where the private market in a transit company type thing, like I know Hong Kong's is, I believe that's private also. So maybe there is some room for marriage to that, but then Uber's whole thing is like personal transit vehicles. So the question has to be, right, like if there's a really cheap, really solid connection to an airport, especially in a city, that would tend to be bad for business for Uber, I would think, right? Because that's probably where they get a lot of their business in a lot of markets. So the question is, like, I think there's room for both because, even in New York, you had a successful taxi business there, along with having a very good subway, but I don't. I don't know what that exactly looks like, right? Because in a way, they are competitors also.
Yeah, just on the very surface level, I imagine that Uber's best complement to a transit agency is when you have the more built out a transit network is, the better it can benefit from Uber as
Right,
sort of
right.
first mile, last mile solution. When you have a large network of commuter rail covering many, many miles, and
Mhm.
it's worthwhile for a passenger to take that transit network and then just need
The
to
short
connect
ride at the end of it.
right. Then it could make sense for a lot of people.
Like
uh,
San Francisco, I think is especially, and I think that is they're probably one of their top markets. So
because making that final mile or first mile connection may cost a transit agency a lot of resources
right.
that Uber could manage to do at a much more efficient in a much more efficient way. So that's just how I would imagine it. I think the less strong, solid a city's transit network is, the
The more
more likely
detrimental it can
Uber,
be.
yeah, the more likely Uber becomes a competitor
Yeah,
um, and not a complement. So
right. Makes sense. Makes sense. So, and and I think the other thing to your point too is, a lot of these agencies in these weaker markets is kind of a catch 22. Like, I wouldn't say Dart is a entity to the scale. It's not bad, but it's not necessarily to the scale of like SEPTA or like MBTA in Boston or whatever. But at the same time, in a place like Dallas, optically, politically, it's all the more important to justify the cost and make sure that the cost factor isn't so high on taxpayers because taxpayers can and will probably in Dallas more likely, vote for, not transit funding or whatever that next step is.
yeah,
So it's a difficult thing to manage there. I do think what I do like about the after hours thing though is, as he said, that there's almost no one taking rides then. So it kind of becomes that justification of, okay, we really need to offer transit for 24 hours a day. And if we are going to do that, can we do it in an inexpensive way like that?
mm-hmm. Yeah. What's funny about Dallas and Dart, um, since we're talking about it, is that for me, it's really one of those systems that is underutilized. I feel like for what it does and what it offers, it just it's far better than the passenger numbers show.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just me as a visitor.
Yeah.
I've never been a resident in a situation where I was using it day, but observing as a visitor, the ride numbers are well below many systems that, quite frankly, think are less useful. So it's just interesting, as you
Yeah.
say. Not really, we need to have some justification, and it's tough because they haven't um, so far.
Well, I think it's funny and kind of ironic. You know, when you think about Texas, it's so car oriented that taking an option like an after hours Uber is, in a way, almost public transit compared to the reliance on the personal vehicle that is present throughout, you know, the region and state compared to many areas. I think to your point, I think Dallas Dart has like something like 90 miles of light rail track, and it has, I think, like maybe 4 times the amount that like Houston, for instance, does. But then at the same time, Houston gets more utility per mile. I think it has like three
Yeah.
times the number of people for miles ridden. And I think part of that comes down to like, I mean, you have a connection to, I think, Love Field and to DFW International. But I think the DF, even in watching another video about this, is a city nerd. So just gonna give him a plug, and you should check him out too. But he gave them a dishonorable mention for having a near hour kind of transit time to the airport from downtown, and that would be kind of hard to, you know, swallow. I think if you're a Dallasite, in terms of just like if you could drive over there in 20 minutes. But I do agree with you on some of the other commuter lines. They could definitely stand to have more ridership.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so this guy, getting back to the guy, he seemed nice enough. He seemed like a very nice person. And to be fair, he's also he did mention that he was new
Yeah,
to the role, new to Uber as a
yeah,
company. Um, and this is what he does. He works, you know, senior account executive, you said, for transit partnerships. So he
right.
worked specifically with cities and government agencies to
Yeah,
kind of find out what their needs are and how Uber can solve those needs. And so,
right.
you know, in his area, what he's doing certainly is probably a lot about trying to help communities with their transit problems.
Yeah,
And so, you know, again, so just to be fair, like what he's doing is I guess on the good side.
yeah, yeah.
um,
Well, and companies in general, I mean, I think there's more of a response to kind of responsibility in general. And, you know, Uber, I think maybe in some ways knowing that, you know, employees might be looking for that. But not only that, but that you know, adding to your point, there were about 10 or 15 other vendors that were there besides Uber that were kind of trying to do a similar thing. And
yeah,
I think that is an area where Uber cares about being liked at this point, right? I mean, they may not, but at this point, they want to be, you know, well liked in the cities and in the networks where they are key, I think, you know, crucial markets. And so they could potentially, if they were, you know, completely bad for business, you know, lose out to one of these other smaller startup ride shares, which would do damage for them in the long haul. I mean, I can't name any of the other companies we saw offhand. And I think we're talking about it. Unfortunately, there's
yeah,
a fair chance many of them may go bottoms up within a couple of years. By the time, you know, we'll see when we get to 2023.
yeah.
But it's interesting that one of them could succeed if they find a way into the cities also, because, you know, Dart is paying Uber and a lot of money.
Yeah, that so that you know that's a great point that there are many competitors that we saw at the expo, all much smaller. Uber Transit was the title sponsor for that first day of the expo. Their booth, if you can call it a booth, was you know dwarfed all of the other vendors in this industry, in this space that we saw. And like you, I can't name any of the other ones. When we were talking about this topic a few minutes before we went live here, and you know, you mentioned that we should chat about Uber Transit and the other companies in the space. I was thinking, man, We saw all the other companies, but what was the name of one of them? I couldn't think of it.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, Now, I do think Lyft uh, could compete in this space if they wanted to. They certainly do the same sort of, I forget what the name of Lyft's Uber pooling is,
yeah,
but they do similar technology where they kind of pre-plan routes
yeah.
in sort of dynamic way. And Lyft was noticeably absent from this. I don't even know if they do work on transit partnerships
Yeah. I
to this.
wonder if one of Uber's kind of non-negotiables for funding it being an official sponsor was that Lyft would be not present. That's
Yeah,
there's kind of that question that comes into factor. But I
Lyft.
mean, to give a
Yeah,
plug to one of our videos, I think Lyft may have a leg up in this department with the emotional partnership, which I believe was furthered or announced recently that they may be starting as soon as 2023 at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. So, Uber has very much reason to be aware of what types of, partner or public ridership systems are available.
yeah, yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with these other upstarts. I'm just assuming that they're upstarts. I don't
Yeah.
know. I
Yeah.
apologize if there's been some companies that have been around for decades and have kind of pivoted and now they've ended up in uh, this space. But yeah, there were a lot of small companies that seem to be doing sort of the same tech-driven solution to transit agencies' needs for sort of one-off or less common routes. And there were a lot of them, and we didn't really talk to anyone. We just kind of quickly passed through their booth areas and looked at some of their displays. But it did seem obvious that what they were doing was similar to what Uber has been doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it'd be interesting to see how the future plays out with this. I think it's one of those other things where, 2 years, a lot can change in terms of how the market looks and how public transit looks post COVID-19 in terms
Right.
of if the argument is that, and Uber could potentially stand to use this, is about the dangers of public transit riding in a post-COVID world. But I think it's an interesting conversation, and I think it'll be it was great talking to Uber Transit at the event.
Yeah. So again, you're just opening the door. Are you saying that Uber should go back to being a competitor rather than a
That's
compliment?
they have that wheel too. I mean, if they so desire, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll have to see. A lot. We're in a time of great change, of fast change, and yeah, in the next few years, we'll start to see what direction things are going in. So,
Yeah,
uh, yeah. Good talking
absolutely.
with you, Chuck. Anything else you want to add
I
before
got
we?
nothing right now, but we will be discussing maybe a couple more topics from what we got there. We really got a lot out of this conference, guys. So it's you know
Yeah. All right. Cool. It's great as always. I'll talk
have a
to you
good one,
later.
everyone.
Mhm. Bye.